So let me continue with my last video. So I kind of rushed through the last part. So Europe, the last part was Europe's strategic failure. They did underdevelopment by design. It said your second point is crucial. The continent where the continent's economists and historians have echoed since Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, 1972. Yeah, I'm gonna get into a detailed discussion about that book. I'm gonna share the screenshot of that book too. Okay. So the key point: extraction, not transformation. Europe continues to import African raw materials while exporting finished goods, preserving value chains abroad. Aid as leverage. Developmental assistance is largely recycled debt tied to procurement from donor countries. Number three, security partnerships over industry. Billions in EU and French funding flow into anti terror operations rather than power grids, rail, or processing plants. If Europe had truly committed to co developing infrastructure, manufacturing capacity, and education, there'd be no strategic vacuum for Moscow or Beijing to fill. Instead, Africa remains dependent by design, creating resentment that leaders like Traore have tapped into. Now, the eastward pivot. Russia and China as uneasy alternatives because it's not like Traore and these other African countries don't realize that China and Russia are not exactly benevolent partners. All right? It's not like the Caribbean as well, with this is happening as well. It's not like the Caribbean don't realize that the Russia and China are not benevolent partners. Okay? Is the fact that these countries have been sources of extraction only for the United States and Europe. The United States and Europe has not invested any money in helping these countries truly modernize and improve. So even though Russia and China, yeah, they want something out of it, they are at least helping cooperating with these countries to build macro infrastructure projects across those countries, all across Africa, which the United States is not doing. As a matter of fact, in during Trump's first administration, especially now, they've actually yanked back to what little we were doing. I know President Obama was starting to do some of that when especially during his second term. Some not solely extractive, but mainly like cooperative, constructive kind of working relationship, you know, which Trump promptly went back on because he's about destroying President Obama's legacy. So we also talk about the strategic trap, Africa's dilemma between empires. Reject Africa today faces a threefold dilemma. Reject Western neocolonialism, avoid Eastern dependency, which is Russia and China, and build genuine internal sovereignty, which is directly threatened and being continually undermined by the Western powers, and could be being undermined right now by even Russia and China, in a sense. If Russia and China sees that where they're going could eventually leave them with a shorter stick, they may be trying to covertly sabotage things even now. And there have been incidences of, especially the Chinese, being extremely racist towards Africans when they've set up their companies over there. But that's for another post. So that means not to say the African people would just trust China and Russia, right? But it's just that the United States and Europe, there are literally centuries of brutality, racism, and genocide and stuff, and with no effort to do any reparations. As a matter of fact, these former African colonies are suing the European Union, the European countries, and America for reparations on the world court, in the world court. That's a thing too, but our media doesn't report that kind of stuff. So, last point, missed opportunity for the West. If the Europe and the US truly wanted stability rather than leverage, they would invest directly in value added industry, not mainly raw extraction. Fund regional infrastructure corridors instead of drone bases. Treat Pan African integration as a stabilizing force rather than a rival bloc. But you see, black people coalescing and improving themselves for themselves, by themselves, overtly so, with independence, is a threat to white supremacy. So that can't be allowed to happen. It threatens the white racial paradigm. The first book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, is what I'm going to talk about mainly now. But the second book is a kind of recent documentation of recently declassified operations of like MI6 and CIA and stuff like that in Africa. So get that book if you want documented proof. It goes all the way back to the Patrice Lumumba and before. It documents all of that stuff. So you want, you know, how Europe underdeveloped Africa is the blueprint for it. It predicts Britain in 1972 still relevant today, like accurately, presciently. And that other book is a documented history of what was done following those rules. So get those two books, guys. So I said, the book, How Europe Developed Africa, is so prescient when it comes to what we're talking about here, meaning the Sahel. Chioma says, absolutely, Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa is the cornerstone text for understanding exactly the dynamics you've been describing. It's remarkable how prescient it remains. It's as if Rodney anticipated not only the economic extraction models of the colonial era, but also the post-colonial neo-imperial continuity that we now see repeating in the Sahel and elsewhere. Let's frame its enduring relevance directly within your line of thought. 1. Rodney's central thesis. Rodney's argument wasn't just that Europe exploited Africa, that's obvious, but that it systematically engineered underdevelopment through economic, political, and psychological mechanisms designed to 1. Extract Africa's surplus value, 2. Destroy local manufacturing capacity, 3. And condition African elites to manage dependency rather than independence. He described it as a deliberate, self-reinforcing structure of dependency, what you've aptly called underdevelopment by design. That's what I called it earlier. Number 2, from colonialism to neocolonialism, Rodney traced the continuum rather than a rupture between the colonial and post-colonial eras. The same banks, mining houses, and Western governments that once wielded direct rule reinvented themselves through, listen to this, debt diplomacy via IMF and World Bank, structural adjustment programs, foreign aid conditionality, and military partnerships. That's precisely the dynamic visible in today's Sahel resource crisis. The West maintains influence not through flag planting, but through quote unquote security cooperation, quote unquote counterterrorism, and loan dependence. Rodney's relevance to the Sahel and Traore. Rodney's logic predicts exactly what is happening now. There's a quote from Rodney's book. Any African leader who attempts to reverse the dependency model, nationalize resources, localize value chains, or assert political autonomy will be met with covert or overt destabilization by global powers whose wealth relies on that dependency. That's Traore's predicament to the letter. He's challenging the colonial division of labor, raw materials for the West, finished goods for the North, and therefore he's marked as a threat. Rodney's analysis of interrupted revolutions fits perfectly. Sankara, Lumumba, Nkrumah, and now Traore are all part of the same interrupted trajectory towards African self-determination. So, to directly to my sister's video that I tagged in my first part of this, the part one, here's what AI says and linked it to Rodney's book. Diaspora citizenship is a Rodneyan idea. Rodney, a Guyanese born Pan Africanist, believed that the diaspora is part of Africa's unfinished liberation. He saw returning black people from the Americas and the Caribbean as, quote, carriers of capital, skills, and political solidarity. 2. Living refutations of colonial racial hierarchies. 3. And potential bridges for economic independence from the West. So when modern African states like Burkina Faso or Benin invite diaspora descendants to reclaim citizenship, it's a direct enactment of Rodney's dream. Transatlantic black unity challenging the economic and cultural domination of Europe and America. No wonder they unalived him. That's precisely why, as you've suggested, such return initiatives might draw covert resistance from Western powers because a united African diasporic front threatens both the resource monopolies and the ideological legitimacy of Western dominance. Rodney's warning and today's echo. Rodney warned that Africa's greatest danger wasn't just foreign greed, but internal collaboration. The local elites trained, funded, and flattened by Western systems to preserve dependency. His words could describe modern technocrats who still defer to IMS quote unquote fiscal discipline or Western security advisors even as they lament colonialism. He essentially predicted today's Sahel fracture, a continent rich enough to sustain itself, yet kept unstable enough to remain exploitable. Which goes directly back to my sister's metaphor about a zombie bitten arm that may need to be cut off to stop the infection spreading. So if this is actually a thing, if they actually did quit it, which I can't find proof of yet, it would be a sound self-defense action mechanism, because the United States would most likely use black Americans or black agents who would go through the process of, becoming citizens and working their way through society and thus destabilize the country. That's not strange. Western powers have used black people to undermine black liberation and black movements before. How do you think they took out the Black Panthers? How do you think they took out Martin Luther King? How do you think Martin Luther King had to move in such the way he had to move? There were black spies and saboteurs within all black liberation movements. In the Caribbean, Marcus Garvey got betrayed by black people up here, for instance, why he got deported. So it's a sound strategy, honestly. So yeah, this is another long one, but I thought it was necessary for us to talk about this because my sister's video brought up some very important points that I wanted to get into. I'm going to tag her video in this as well. I'm not going to stitch it because I can't stitch it and do some of the things that I did here. So, yeah, it's a long video, but it's worth going through. Okay? It's late. Everyone have a good night. In closing, there's a long video here of the Belgian Prime Minister addressing the very same issue we're talking about. She used some very poetic language in there. As I said, it's 15 minutes long, her speech, but it's worth listening to. And it ties directly into what we were talking about. So, everyone have a good night. I close out with that one.
Madam Chairperson, Your Excellencies, and may I start, Chairperson of the African Union, President of Angola, Your Excellency, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, and our host, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Your Excellency, outgoing Chairperson of the African Union and President of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, Your Majesties, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government of the African Union, and First Ladies present, Your Excellency, the President of the Palestinian Authority, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency Moussa Faki Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Your Excellencies, former heads of state and heads of government of the African Union, distinguished delegates, ambassadors, and guests all. I stand here clothed in the spirit of the battles of Adwa, conscious that it was that battle within 24 hours that shook the confidence of the powers of Europe, but inspired the people of Africa and the children of the African diaspora that good would prevail over evil and light over darkness, but only in the context of our unity. I stand here conscious that it was that battle that forged the beginnings of Pan-Africanism that eventually led to the movement for independence and the destruction of the colonial powers to give us not full development and power, but the first steps of political independence. I stand here conscious and buffeted by the dreams and works of the great Pan-African pioneers, and conscious that as a children of the Caribbean, we have long dreamt for the moment of unity with our brothers and sisters of Africa a division that was secured by those whose success and survival depended on separation of us rather than on the ability for us to act as one common people. Our relationship, you can say, was embryonic. But regrettably, as long as it has been and as related as we have been, it has been sporadic. And it is up to us as the children of independent states to determine whether the history of separation shall be our future or whether the spirit of Adwa can be our inspiration to confront the challenges of a new world. Yes, I stand here as a daughter of Africa. I stand here equally as a proud Prime Minister of Barbados, a country which is the first landmass that you reach after you leave this great continent of Africa, a country which became a hub for the wrong reasons. But today I come to Ethiopia to share with you in the Africa Union that we can be a hub now for the right reasons between our two peoples. I stand here as the proud chairman of CARICOM, the Caribbean community, recognizing that as a member of the 6th region of Africa, we have come to reclaim our Atlantic destiny. We have come to ensure that the very futures of our people are different and will not once again be determined by a middleman who will ensure that the Middle Passage is one that sees our people at the bottom of the ocean's floor of the Atlantic or in the fields of the plantations of the Caribbean, but instead that it will be a future that sees our people, hears our people, feels our people, and that will determine in future that it is we who shall forge the manner in which we cooperate, integrate, and invest, rather than simply being victims of a past history. I stand here equally as the chair of the V20, 70 countries across the world that are climate vulnerable, 40% of whom come from this great continent of Africa, recognizing that it is only through unity that we can confront the existential crisis of our generation, that of the climate crisis. The Secretary General of the United Nations has already laid out, ably so, many of the iniquities that we continue to face in spite of political independence. It was His Majesty Haile Selassie who popularized and told us that there shall be no first-class or second-class citizens, words popularized by Bob Marley, learned by all of our people without appropriately recognizing the context in which he spoke and the mission which must be ours for generations until it is achieved. He told us that there would be war if there were first-class and second-class citizens. He told us that there would be war if the color of our skin was more significant than the color of our eyes. And we see here in the continent the continued descent into conflicts born out of ethnicity differences, born out of a mad grab for resources, not invariably for our own benefit, but for the benefit of others who seek to use our people as pawns in the determination of their own future. But we stand here as proud people, and we have enough among ourselves to know the difference between right and wrong, and to forge a future that is not for a few, but for the many. Indeed, as the world confronts the climate crisis, it is the poorest of the poor who remain the most vulnerable to floods and droughts and hurricanes. It is the poorest of the poor, and soon to be the middle of the middle, who will no longer be able to access insurance and therefore to be able to forge ahead with development if we do not make changes. We have examples of a partnership that have worked for us, not just from the spirit of Adwa and the conquest and the rise of the Pan-Africanist movement in our history, but within recent times. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it was the African Union, under the leadership then of President Ramaphosa, and with the assistance of Dr. Tedros of the WHO, that recognized that the Caribbean, which was being marginalized by denial of access to basic therapeutics, basic medical equipment, to vaccines, that we should not be left as pariahs on the global landscape, but that our brothers and sisters in Africa would bring us through the Africa Medical Supplies platform to be able to ensure that we could secure for our own people. It was with the solidarity of many of you in the Africa Union that the Bridgetown Initiative has been able to take root and to make a case for a more modern and a fairer system that allows us to be able to access finance and to be able to put in place measures that allow us to be able to pause our repayment of debt during the period of necessity for rebuilding after horrific climatic events. We have seen how partnership helps us. We do not need any more evidence. What is required of us is to lead the way to peace, to prosperity, and to justice. And the reparations which we call for the international community to be able to recognize, first and foremost, with that which we ask from each of our children. Say sorry. Say sorry, and mean it. And after you say sorry, recognize that the future of the world is not possible without the stability of Africa and its diaspora. For as long as hypocrisy and double standards remain, it will be impossible to secure stability and peace in any nation across the earth. The reparations that we call for, beyond sorry, must be for fair access and development and compensation, because we each started the journey of independence with a chronic deficit, a deficit of resources, a deficit of fairness, a deficit of opportunity. And it is up to us, many of us in the second and third generation of independence, to be able to frame out fairly in a mature conversation what those reparations must look like if we are to attain justice and to inspire the young people of this world that good must always prevail over evil. But it is not only the reparations that we ask from the international community, because we ourselves must repair the damage that was foisted on us. The notion that transit visas, begging for them, must be the lot of our people in order to move across this world cannot be something that gives us satisfaction. To go east and to go west, we are first forced to go north. It is not right. And it is not beyond the heads of government and heads of state, of the region, of the Caribbean community, and of the continent of Africa to determine that we must stop talking about, but simply do what is necessary to build the air bridges and sea bridges to guarantee that we control our destiny. I ask us to reflect on this because it is this simple act, apart from our music and our culture and our food, that will guarantee that it is not simply heads of government and heads of state that will meet in Accra or Bridgetown, but it is ordinary people who will be able to trade and to move from the closest point of Dakar to the closest point of Bridgetown, to be able to open up the opportunities that technically ought to be available not just simply through the Africa Free Trade Area or the CARICOM single market and economy, but through the combined opportunities provided by both. I ask us equally to recognize that in an era where AI is threatening to redefine what humanity can do and even if we can survive, that it is not ours to be the victims once again of technology as we were with gunpowder, but it is for us to help shape the future of the world, because more often than not it is Africa and its people who have brought the humanizing forces to bear on civilization. And if we are to be the cradle of civilization, then we are to be the protectors of people and planet, of humanity, as we go forward. And some watching on may say, how? And I say, how not? How not does a continent that has 40% of the world's minerals not be in charge of helping to secure the destiny and stability of the planet? How not does the numbers of our two communities, who constitute a third of the world's states, not act in singular purpose to forge the kind of world that we want and to be able to ensure that the institutions that deny access to us, to hear our voices as reflective of the continent and of the small island developing states of the world? How do we not secure that admission, which is not only just, but a moral imperative if the world is to have stability in this 21st century? My friends, I ask you, how do we not secure this victory when 1 in every 5 and possibly 1 in every 4 persons on the planet will come from this continent and its diaspora? Those who lead today have a moral imperative, not just to our citizens in our own countries, but above all else, to unity. The spirit of Adwa demands of us that we recognize that even in the face of the greatest technology being foisted upon us, that we can rise and win if we act in unity.